The old Victorian mansion loomed over Hollow Creek like a forgotten sentinel, its gables silhouetted against the fading twilight. For Jonathan Miller, it was a beacon of hope, a chance to rebuild his life after a series of unfortunate events. His architectural firm had taken a hit during the economic downturn, and a fresh start was exactly what his family needed. The price of the mansion, ridiculously low for its size and grandeur, had sealed the deal. "Are you sure about this, John?" Sarah Miller asked, her voice laced with a hint of apprehension. She was a writer, always searching for inspiration, and the house certainly had an aura that could spark any imagination. But there was something else, an undercurrent of unease that she couldn't quite shake off. "It's perfect, Sarah," Jonathan replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "The kids will have plenty of space, and you'll have the quiet you need to write. Besides," he added with a grin, "think of the stories you can create in a place like this." Emily, their teenage daughter, rolled her eyes but couldn't hide a flicker of excitement. Lucas, the youngest, clung to his mother's hand, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The house was imposing, with its dark, wooden panels, stained glass windows, and a tower that seemed to pierce the sky. As they stepped inside, a musty scent filled their nostrils, a mixture of old wood, dust, and something else, something indefinable. The interior was just as impressive as the exterior, with high ceilings, ornate fireplaces, and a grand staircase that swept up to the second floor. The rooms were spacious, though filled with shadows that danced in the fading light. As they explored, they began to hear a faint sound, a soft whispering that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Did you hear that?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's probably just the wind," Jonathan said, trying to reassure his son and himself. But as they settled in for the night, the whispering grew louder, weaving its way into their dreams, a haunting melody that seemed to promise both wonder and dread. The whispers intensified as the days passed, no longer faint murmurs but distinct, though unintelligible voices. They seemed to emanate from the very walls, following the Millers from room to room. Lucas, the youngest, was the most affected. His nights were plagued by nightmares, vivid and terrifying visions of shadowy figures lurking in the corners of his room. He would wake up screaming, his small body trembling with fear, claiming he saw them. "They're watching me, Mommy," he'd whimper, his eyes wide with terror. "They don't want us here." Sarah tried to soothe him, attributing his fears to an overactive imagination and the strangeness of their new home. But deep down, she felt a growing unease, a sense that something was amiss. The whispers were becoming increasingly intrusive, seeping into her thoughts, disrupting her writing. She would often find herself staring at the blank page, her mind filled with a cacophony of voices, unable to concentrate. Emily, ever the skeptic, initially dismissed her brother's fears and her mother's unease. But even she couldn't deny the strange occurrences that were happening. Objects would move on their own, doors would creak open and slam shut, and the temperature in certain rooms would drop suddenly, leaving a chill in the air. Driven by a morbid curiosity, she began to research the history of the house, spending hours in the local library and scouring the internet for any information she could find. She discovered that the mansion had once belonged to a family named Blackwood, who had mysteriously disappeared decades ago. The locals whispered stories of dark rituals and strange occurrences, but no one knew for sure what had happened to them. The mystery surrounding the Blackwoods only fueled Emily's curiosity, and she became determined to uncover the truth. One evening, as Sarah was working in her study, she felt a sudden chill, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She looked up from her laptop to see a faint mist swirling in the air, forming a shadowy figure in the corner of the room. A cold dread gripped her heart as she realized that they were not alone in the house. Driven by the growing sense that something was deeply wrong, Emily delved even further into the history of the Blackwood Mansion. She spent hours in the local library, examining old newspapers and city records, and scoured the internet for any information she could find. The story that began to unfold was disturbing. The Blackwood family, once prominent in Hollow Creek, had vanished without a trace in the 1950s. Rumors ranged from a tragic accident to a sudden escape, but no official explanation was ever found. Local stories, however, whispered about dark rituals and occult practices, suggesting that the Blackwoods had become involved in something forbidden. One day, while walking through town, Emily encountered Mr. Thompson, an elderly neighbor who lived down the street from the mansion. He was a taciturn man with piercing eyes that seemed to have seen a lot. Intrigued, Emily asked him about the Blackwoods. "Ah, the Blackwoods," Mr. Thompson said, his voice raspy with age. "A strange family, always keeping to themselves. They dabbled in things they shouldn't have, you know, dark things." He told Emily about the strange sounds and lights that emanated from the mansion at night, and about rumors of rituals performed in the basement. He spoke of the Blackwoods' sudden disappearance and the fear he had felt at the time. "That house has never brought anything but trouble," he said, shaking his head. "It's best to leave it alone." Back at the mansion, Emily shared her findings with her parents. John, ever the rational one, tried to dismiss the stories as mere superstitions, but even he couldn't deny the growing feeling that something was wrong. Sarah, on the other hand, was increasingly convinced that the house was haunted. While exploring the dusty basement, they found a diary hidden in a secret compartment. The yellowed pages were filled with intricate writing, describing strange rituals and dark invocations. The diary belonged to a member of the Blackwood family, and its disturbing accounts shed new light on the events that had taken place in the house. The diary's revelations cast a pall over the Miller household. The Blackwoods, it seemed, had been dabbling in dark arts, attempting to contact spirits and harness their power. Their rituals, however, had gone awry, unleashing something malevolent that had consumed them all. The whispers, the shadows, the strange occurrences. They were all manifestations of this dark entity, trapped within the walls of the mansion. As if to confirm their fears, the paranormal activity intensified. Objects began to move on their own. Doors slammed shut with unseen force, and cold spots appeared throughout the house. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, sometimes calling out their names, other times uttering chilling phrases that sent shivers down their spines. One night, as Emily was looking through an old photo album she had found in the attic, she noticed something peculiar. The faces in the photos were blurred, as if someone had tried to erase them. But the eyes were clear, and they seemed to follow her as she turned the pages. A sense of dread washed over her as she realized that she was looking at the Blackwoods, or what was left of them. Lucas, the youngest, was the most vulnerable to the entity's influence. He would often wake up screaming, claiming that he saw shadows lurking in his room, watching him. One night he was attacked by one of these shadows, leaving strange marks on his skin, marks that resembled claw marks. Sarah, who had always been skeptical of the supernatural, was now a believer. She felt a constant presence in the house, a malevolent force that was watching them, waiting for an opportunity to strike. She began to have nightmares, vivid and terrifying dreams of the Blackwoods, their faces contorted in agony, their voices whispering her name. John, the ever-rational father, tried to find logical explanations for the strange occurrences. But even he couldn't deny the evidence before him. The house was haunted, and they were in danger. He knew that they had to do something, but he didn't know what. They were trapped in a nightmare, and there seemed to be no escape. The Millers, now fully aware of the malevolent presence in their home, knew they had to act. The spirits were growing stronger, their manifestations more violent, and they were clearly targeting Lucas, the most vulnerable among them. Emily, with her newfound knowledge of the Blackwoods, suggested a séance, hoping to communicate with the spirits and perhaps find a way to appease them. John, though skeptical, agreed, seeing no other option. They gathered in the living room, the room where the paranormal activity seemed to be the strongest. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the faint whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls. They lit candles, creating a dim, eerie atmosphere, and sat around an old wooden table. Emily, acting as the medium, began to call out to the spirits, asking them to reveal themselves. At first there was no response, only the unsettling silence and the flickering candlelight. Then the whispers grew louder, transforming into distinct voices, some male, some female, all filled with anger and resentment. "You have disturbed our rest," one of the voices hissed. "You do not belong here." The spirits began to manifest, swirling shadows forming into ghostly figures, their faces contorted in rage. They revealed their story, a tale of dark rituals gone wrong, of a desperate attempt to gain power that had ended in their destruction. They blamed the Millers for intruding on their domain, for disturbing their eternal torment. The atmosphere in the room grew increasingly hostile. Objects flew across the room, the candles flickered violently, and the temperature plummeted. The spirits focused their anger on Lucas, their voices growing louder, their forms more menacing. They tried to possess him, to use his body as a vessel to unleash their fury. John and Sarah, terrified for their son, tried to shield him from the spirits' attacks. They shouted at the entities, demanding that they leave their family alone. But their pleas fell on deaf ears, the spirits' rage only intensifying. The confrontation reached its peak, a chaotic whirlwind of paranormal activity threatening to tear the Millers apart. With the confrontation escalating, John knew they needed more help. He remembered Mr. Thompson's mention of a local priest, Father Michael, who had dealt with similar cases in the past. He called the priest, who arrived at the mansion, his face grim. Father Michael immediately sensed the dark presence in the house. He prepared for an exorcism, gathering his tools and reciting prayers. The spirits, sensing his power, lashed out, their voices reaching a deafening crescendo, their forms becoming more solid, more threatening. The exorcism began, a battle between the forces of good and evil. Father Michael's voice echoed through the house, his words a powerful weapon against the darkness. The spirits fought back, their attacks growing more violent, their voices filled with hatred. Emily, remembering the diary's description of the Blackwoods ritual, realized that the spirits were trapped, unable to move on. She found an old amulet, a relic of the Blackwoods' attempts to control the spirits, and used it to break the connection, freeing the trapped souls. As the connection was severed, the spirits weakened, their forms fading, their voices becoming faint whispers. Father Michael continued his exorcism, driving the remaining darkness from the house. The battle was over. With the house cleansed, a sense of peace settled over the mansion. The whispers were gone, the shadows had vanished, and the air was clear. The Millers, exhausted but relieved, thanked Father Michael for his help. They decided to leave Hollow Creek, to find a new home, a new beginning. The Blackwood Mansion, once a symbol of hope, had become a nightmare. They knew that they would never forget their experience, but they hoped that they could move on, leaving the darkness behind.